All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast, where Luka Doncic, Luka Don cheat code, because we're number two. We're number two. We're the best team that's ever been assembled in all professional sports, apparently. I'm your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I am joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. Tommy, if I had told you back in December that the Lakers had somehow crept up to the number two spot by March, what would you have thought had happened to the roster, either internally or externally, to get us to this point?
I don't even know that I would have thought anything happened to our roster. I would have thought the rest of the rosters blew up somehow, and there were only two teams left. And so it was just us there at number two.
It was just like a war of attrition. Somehow the entire league folded, and it was just the Lakers and whoever else.
Yeah.
I think for me, I would have been like, oh, so the Lakers somehow managed to get Walker Kessler, right? And then Anthony Davis and LeBron James managed to stay healthy. The group that was left over continued to gel. Austin Reeves made the next leap. Maybe outside of Walker Kessler, we also got Dorian Finney-Smith, who we ended up getting. So I would have probably said all of those things happened. Instead, we have Luka Doncic and LeBron James and Jordan Goodwin, apparently, and Rui Hachimura and Austin Reeves don't even have to play anymore for us to win. So here we are. All right, look, for this episode, I really don't have any organized concrete agenda. The only thing I wrote in my notes was Lakers, really good. So I just kind of wanted to open up the floor and revel and gush about this team and this incredible stretch that they're on. So the Lakers are currently 39 and 21. They are second in the West. They have won 7 in a row now. They are 19 and 4 in their last 23 games. I believe they are still leading the NBA in defensive rating. And I forget how many games in the last stretch now that they've held teams to like either under 100 or under 105, but it's been a pretty long stretch. I guess I could pull up the game log right now. But regardless, without Austin Reeves, without Rui Hachimura in these last few games against the Clippers back to back, and then against the New Orleans Pelicans, who aren't a joke because the Lakers have tended to play down against their opponents recently. And Zion Williamson looked amazing last night. But against all of these different types of opponents in under any circumstance and context, missing guys here and there, the Lakers have managed to keep on winning. Congrats to LeBron James on hitting 50,000 points all time. Still insane that the player who ended up assisting him on his 50,000th point was Luka Doncic. If I had told you that back in December, yeah, I don't know what you would have done. That's some real Twilight fan fiction stuff come to life right there. But where do you want to start, Tommy? What do you think about how relentlessly good this team is? Because again, even without two of their top four players in Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura, they just keep on winning. So just your overall thoughts on how this team has sort of coalesced.
Yeah, this team, they just keep winning, like you said. I mean, I think the success is causing some sort of like cognitive dissonance in certain NBA fans who look at the roster and they're like, oh, well, obviously this team's not going to be able to defend the paint. And then it's like you look at the numbers, and since January 15th, we're the first in opponents' points in the paint. It's like you look at the roster and it's like, oh, Luka Doncic. I mean, I think this is kind of a low IQ take that some people had early on, but Luka Doncic and LeBron James both need the ball. How's that going to work? It's like obviously working extremely well. Like, oh well, the bench, what about the bench? Everybody is, all the good offensive players are in the starting lineup. How is the bench going to score? And the bench has been stepping up significantly, especially these last few games with Rui and Austin out. And so it's like every obstacle that gets thrown in front of these guys, they seem to be figuring out and working through. I think the scary thing for teams moving forward, other teams in the league, I should say, is I don't even think this group has scratched the surface of what they can be offensively. Maybe
Yeah.
they've just started to scratch the surface. Maybe in that second Clippers game and in the last game against the Pelicans, but it's going to be tough. You use the word relentless, and I think that's sort of what's happening now with LeBron and Luka. we were so spoiled for so long, and it's like, LeBron is a fantastic player. And the team, like the entire time LeBron has been on the Lakers, anytime he goes to sit down, the team is worse, right? I think that's just like the nature of having a Hall of Fame, like all-time great player on your team, who's continued to perform at that level. But it's just like you start the game with LeBron and Luka, and Luka's been getting off to these really hot starts, and kind of focusing on finding his own shot early in games. And then, LeBron takes his rest, and then Luka goes out for his rest, and it's like, who's coming off the bench? Oh, it's LeBron James. And then LeBron goes out, and it's like, okay, you take a half breath, and then you look over at the side, who's coming in? Luka. And it's just like, it's like, I said this before that, or when the trade happened, and I think it's becoming more clear now. This is like, even notwithstanding how well LeBron has played this year, this is the first time in his career that I think he is not like clearly the best player on this team. Now we don't need to litigate who's better between him and Luka today, but it's not. This is the first time where it's like there's not really a discussion. It's like Luka is right there or
Mhm.
above. And so that is like LeBron James as your second best player is just such a silly thing to think about. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just impressive in every category, essentially.
Yeah, I think with regards to LeBron and Luka, and we'll get to some of the role players later because I want to highlight guys like Jaxson Hayes, Jared Vanderbilt, and Dalton Knecht. But with regards to the LeBron and Luka tandem, never has the phrase or motto "pick your poison" been so apt than with these two. And obviously, we've seen different iterations of pick your poison with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, Kobe and Pau, et cetera, et cetera. But it's almost like the similarities and redundancies between LeBron James and Luka Doncic have kind of left this lazy opinion in people's minds that, yeah, the fit is not going to work. Why would you want two of the same thing? But I think as we've seen more of Luka Doncic, it's so clear. Yes, LeBron James and Luka Doncic, they are very similar in their sort of dominance and versatility offensively in cutting teams up, and they're similar in their basketball IQ and vision. But they are also so unique and different aesthetically in their approach to the game, in their approach to getting similar numbers, if that makes any sense. And it's almost counterintuitive, but like they're their redundancies in how they approach the game have almost like stacked on top of each other and amplified each other instead of working against each other, which I think was the natural on paper thought that most people had. It's like, wouldn't you just want LeBron James next to a big man? Or wouldn't you want LeBron James next to like a smaller size point guard who would actually play that position, not another 6'8" dude? But yeah, kind of what everybody's been saying ever since we traded for Luka Doncic. It was a trite phrase, but honestly, we've never seen anything like this before because we kind of haven't, at least not in the last like decade or so, because traditionally it has always been a forward and a wing, a forward and a point guard, a forward and a big, but never like a forward and another forward who's kind of like him, but way slower and more craftier? And so Luka Doncic is starting to get more comfortable. He's had back to back games now with 5+ 3 pointers after not being able to hit a lick from the outside consistently. And it kind of just shows you once Luka gets rolling, it's tough to stop. It's over. Last night, he had a career high 15 assists. He joined a very prestigious group in Lakers history of players who had hit 30 plus points and 15 plus assists. And then, yeah, oh, by the way, LeBron James also had like 34 points of his own, hit 50,000 plus points, et cetera, et cetera. And I think right now it's just all too much for defenses to comprehend Luka Doncic by himself, comprehend Luka Doncic alongside LeBron James, and then comprehend that LeBron James is 40 years old and still hammering it down on people's heads. So anything else you want to add before we talk about the role players with regards to, I mean, you kind of said your piece about LeBron and Luka, but anything else you wanted to add about Luka getting comfortable?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we the expectation, I guess, there was this idea that like Luca and LeBron wouldn't fit because they both need the ball to be effective. And it's just, that notion was always sort of silly to me. I mean, even from the beginning, I think like first of all, we're less under a year removed from Luka going to the finals with Kyrie Irving, who's like also extremely ball dominant. LeBron wanted another ball dominant player so much that he was willing to have the front office gut a championship roster to get him Russell Westbrook. And then from then on, like, keeping D'Lo around on the roster, forcing Austin Reeves into more of an on-ball role. I mean, he's wanted this for years and years, and it's just crazy that he got probably the best player in the NBA other than himself, who sort of fills those roles to just be his teammate now. And yeah, I think fans are going to realize just how good Luka is. I guess I don't know. Maybe I assumed everybody knew when the trade happened. I watched a lot of Luka over the past 5 years. I don't know. I have family in Dallas. My cousin's a Maps fan, so I've always kind of kept up with Luka. But he is. It's not like an exaggeration to say he's a top X player. It's hard to say this season because he's been hurt, but top five player. And as a second year player, it became very clear that if he was able to stay healthy, he was going to have a Hall of Fame career. And that's not an easy thing to project for most 20-year-olds. So, I'm still sort of in awe just watching these two on the court. And it feels like we're watching all-star games like every single night, but like more fun because they're competitive.
Yeah, and I think the word that you use, cognitive dissonance, is going to stay there for a while with Luka, whether it's you still can't believe that he's doing this in a Lakers jersey, or if you haven't watched him day in, day out, like some Mavs fans have, you still can't believe that a dude this slow is manipulating the game to the extent that he is,
Yeah.
and how, again, the dichotomy between him and LeBron James, where you see LeBron James still at 40 years old skying above the rim to throw down these alley-oop jams, and then you watch Luka Doncic run up and down the floor, and you're almost like, Luka Doncic moves like the 40-year-old and LeBron James moves like the 25-year-old, and yet it just works. It's like none of it makes any sense, but you're like, okay, I guess I just have to get used to this like mind f, because yeah, Luka Doncic, as slow as he's moving, it's almost like he's forcing the world around him to move even slower, because the way that he's able to just bend the court to his liking is, yeah, uncanny and sublime. So why don't we take it to break here and then pitch it to our sponsors, and then when we return, let's highlight some of the role players who have helped flank and uplift the two superstars in LeBron James and Luka Doncic. All right, so we're back. No underdog fantasy read today. I think I'm going to do that again in 2 weeks, but the campaign is over, so no call 1-800 next step whatever for now. But so let's talk about some of the role players who have come alongside LeBron James and Luka Doncic in this recent stretch, because there is such a palpable sense of these guys knowing their role to the fullest extent than we've ever seen. And yeah, I don't know. It's for me, that's been also the most like amazing part too, where I've never seen, I don't want to say never, but this collection of guys, I didn't think we'd ever get to this point or reach this point. But let's start here. Let's talk about Jaxson Hayes, the much maligned Jaxson Hayes, because when he picked up his player option this summer, all the fans were like, oh man, what the heck? I can't believe Rob Pelinka gave these dudes player options. And I don't want to relitigate that, but I just want to point to the fact that like Jaxson Hayes has never been many Lakers fans' cup of tea. It makes sense. He's sloppy, he's wild, he fouls a lot, etc., etc. But seeing how Jaxson Hayes has grown in the last 17 to 18 games ever since he stepped into that role as the Lakers starting center in Anthony Davis's absence, it is just, I don't know, eye-opening. And now you begin to see why he was a lotto pick back in 2019. And he was actually picked with one of the draft picks that the Pelicans got in the Anthony Davis trade. I believe they traded down. They traded the 4th pick for the 8th and 10th pick or whatever to get Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaxson Hayes, or maybe it was 8 and 13. Regardless, Jaxson Hayes was a former lottery pick. And now we're starting to see why he had that pedigree. Even though when he came out of college, he came out of Texas, he was super raw and he was mainly leaning on his explosive athleticism. But over these last few games, last night he had like 19 points at the half, 8 for 8 from the field, 10 rebounds. He tied a Lakers career high 19 points last night. And just overall in this last stretch, he has been so manic on both ends of the court, but manic in the best sense of the word, because when you bring up Manic and Jaxson Hayes, typically you think, oh man, this guy is doing some stupid stuff on the court. He's probably getting fouled out, etc. And that may have been the case, in prior months when he had an inconsistent role. But ever since JJ Redick told him, hey man, no Mark Williams here. You're the starting center. We need you for a dedicated at least 18 minutes a night. Lock in. Well, Jaxson Hayes has locked the F in. He has been so good defensively, not only from like an athletic rim protection standpoint, but just like a knowing where to be standpoint, a positional foundational standpoint. The rebounds that he's now skying to get, he's really competing for, and he's doing it at a much more consistent level. If you just looked at his game log and you're like, 4 rebounds, 5 rebounds, that's not that great. But if you actually watch the types of rebounds that Jaxson Hayes has been securing and pulling down, you will notice he's actually getting in there. He's actually like in the scrum, making sure to extend his arm out and use his athleticism for productive purposes, not just to get the highlight reel block. And as it pertains to blocking shots, Jaxson Hayes has ironically never been a prolific shot blocker. He's a career 0.7 block per game sort of player. But in this last stretch, because he's been so engaged in all levels of the defensive end of the court, now the blocking stats have come along with him as well. He's averaging like 1.5 blocks in the last stretch. And even if he isn't blocking the shot tangibly, he's using great verticality, keeping his hands high, and making sure that defenders who knife into the lane feel his body. And just his rotations have been crisp. And I don't know, I can't say enough about Jaxson Hayes, even if his stats don't necessarily show how important and dominant he is, especially because you have to keep in mind that he is sort of capped at that 20 to 22 minute mark. So if he actually played 30 minutes, his stats would look a lot better. But honestly, the Lakers, this is all the Lakers need from Jaxson Hayes. So your thoughts on Jaxson Hayes hitting his stride and doing all the big man things a lot better and more consistently?
So it feels like a lot of teams over the years that have had success always have like one of these like sort of reclamation projects, or guys who for either were injured or and then had this comeback, or former lottery picks who it didn't pan out with their first team and then they have the comeback. And we've had a number of those come through come through the Lakers in free agency over the years. I mean, notably Malik Monk was a big one. He sort of had his first breakout year with us. I'll even throw like maybe not Lonnie Walker, Troy Brown though, had a good year with us. And I think is out of the league currently, So, but it's like you get these guys who maybe didn't end up in the most ideal situation when they were young, and a change of scenery changes things. And I think Hayes, he was drafted into New Orleans. I can't remember the exact timing, if it was the same draft or the year after or what it was, but then they had Zion, and that's a clunky fit. So they, let Jaxson Hayes go. I don't think, because he clearly wasn't part of their future plans. It seemed like he never got that like very intense development he needed. I mean, he was drafted as a project big. I think the comparison at the time was DeAndre Jordan, but DeAndre Jordan was a second round pick, out of Texas A&M, and it was a lot. You would expect a lot less out of those types of guys than you do out of a lottery pick. And so when you get a project player in the lottery and they don't start just developing on their own, the wheels come off the wagon, I think, kind of quickly in those situations. And
Can I just add one thing? And this is, I don't know, this may muddle what you're about to say, but there was one stretch in Jaxson Hayes' 2021-22 season where he started 28 games for the Pelicans. And this may have been like a looter in a riot situation, but regardless, he started 28 games for them that season. and he averaged 12 points, 6 rebounds, like a block a game, a steal a game, and actually hit like 14 of 37 from three. So there is this one flash of Jaxson Hayes' potential. But I think the problem with him, and maybe it's a function of the Pelicans just giving up on him too early for trying to find a better fit with Zion Williamson. But it's not like he never showed anything,
Right,
right?
right.
There's that one stretch, and he has shown stretches in previous seasons. It's just I think with him, the moment a team lets a lotto pick go, I feel like he gets that scarlet letter of reclamation project, and teams, even if they pick him up, including the Lakers, are hesitant to ever give him a promised role or consistent run again, even if that player desperately needs consistent reps to truly find himself. And I think this was more due to circumstance, right? Because Anthony Davis got traded, the Mark Williams thing fell through, but somehow Jaxson Hayes found himself in a place where the Lakers are almost forced into a situation where on a nightly basis, he has to go out there and produce. And on a nightly basis, he knows that the team is counting on him and that he has, at the very least, 18 minutes to play around with. And I think that just does a lot for a player's psyche, especially one of Jaxson Hayes' ilk, who does have that athleticism and high ceiling. And oh, by the way, is still 24 years old. So,
Yeah, and that's like another thing to keep in mind, right? Is like guys make it to the NBA for a reason, and most guys who are in the NBA, if you give them a consistent 30 minutes a night for 80 games, like they'll eventually figure out a way to put up some stats. What's hard is like, you may play 10 minutes some nights, you may play 20, some nights you might not play at all. And I think Jaxson was kind of caught in that purgatory for, certainly a lot of his time with the Pelicans, but then also last year, also most of this year so far, because of AD, and the arguably clunky fit there. And so, yeah, a lot of it is him just stepping up and I sort of identifying this situation where he has to go out and produce and there's no other choice. And he knows he's going to get consistent minutes because he's the only big man. So all of that plays a role for sure. But I give major props, as I've done throughout the year and will continue to do so, for to JJ's coaching staff. I think
mhm.
what these guys have figured out, it's like, we've had Phil Handy for, as one of our assistants for many years, and he was like a known, like, really good player development coach. I think there's player development, like developing skills, but I also think there's an aspect of coaching that JJ seems to have picked up really fast and has become elite at it. And I think that's identifying how to communicate complicated concepts to players in a way that they can digest easily. And whatever he's telling Jaxson about defensive positioning and what they need from him, and we've had similar discussions when it comes to Rui, but like it's just clicking. And it's not just like, oh, Jaxson, in the background has been quietly working on his lateral quickness. Those are all things that guys do, but like something has changed in his understanding of the court on both ends. He
Mhm.
understands what he's supposed to do on offense. He understands what's expected of him on defense, and he's executing. He's executing the game plan, and it's making him and everybody else look better. And you posted or sent me a stat yesterday that he had like the best defensive rating among centers in February. And honestly, setting aside that that's like maybe a misleading stat in some ways, the eye test like sort of proves that. I mean, you watch this guy, he's switching out to like forwards on the perimeter and keeping up with them. Even some guards, obviously nobody can just stop the
Yeah.
quickest guards in the league one on one. Even the best defensive guards can't do that. But he's doing that. He's offering rim protection. He is boxing out in a way that I have not seen. I mean, like he was on the team all year last year. I don't know. This box out, energy wasn't there last year for sure. And so like he's just like he's doing everything. He's doing the little things, he's doing the big things. And it's just been like really impressive to watch. I mean, people criticized Rob so much last year for giving him the player option for the second year. And even when he opted in, we said, like, look, it's not like there's a better option out there. Like, who would we have gotten at that
Exactly.
price? Like, he opted in for
Yep.
2.8 million, and Drew Eubanks was like getting paid 5 million. So it's like it I don't know why it was criticized, but people felt the need to criticize it, and it's been vindicating. Candidly, I didn't think he was going to be this good, but you always saw the potential.
Yeah.
You always saw the potential there, and yeah, it's really nice that it's worked out. And honestly, I mean, thank God we have his early bird rights, because I hope we keep him moving forward. If you look at the free agent options for centers moving forward, it's like pretty bleak.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy because I feel like I want to be careful with my words here, but I do feel like Jaxson Hayes has sort of become a facsimile of what Anthony Davis was defensively. Obviously, he does not have Anthony Davis's IQ and quick twitch defensive instincts, but in terms of who was left on the roster, Jaxson Hayes provided the next best like mobility at the center position to guard out to the perimeter and then switch back and rotate back to the rim as a weak side shot blocker. Like, he, out of anyone else on the roster, can approximate what Anthony Davis was giving us defensively. And while again he's not the same type of defender as Anthony Davis, because we've now flanked him with Dorian Finney-Smith, Jared Vanderbilt, Rui Hachimura, who's engaged, LeBron James, who's engaged defensively, Luka Doncic, who's doing his Marc Gasol defensive scrappiness thing. When he's surrounded and flanked by those by that wall of forwards, all of a sudden, like, he does look like he's always been this sort of like grounded defensive center. So yeah, huge props to Jaxson Hayes, and I'm super excited to see how he continues to grow, even if like the extent of this is just he is the surefire backup center for the Lakers next year, which I hope that's the case, because again, we can sign him using early bird rights and don't have to use one of our exceptions or don't have to use cap space, which we won't have this summer. All right, let's really quickly shift it over and talk about Jared Vanderbilt, because I think the first two games out of the All-Star break, or maybe the first two games prior to the All-Star break, he looked kind of bad. He looked like he had regressed. Like, when Jared Vanderbilt first came back, we were all surprised by how like energetic and scrappy he was. We're like, oh shoot, like, be careful, Vando. We don't want you to tweak anything. So we were like, oh, this dude is just coming out the gates, guns blazing. And then it hit a little bit of a lull, I think, right around the time that Luka Doncic actually started playing games for the Lakers. And I was like, oh, Vando looks kind of out of it. And then in the last 8 games or so, Vando is back with a capital B, back with a capital BBB, whatever that means. Especially last night, I think Jared Vanderbilt had like 12 points and 8 rebounds in only like 20 minutes. But outside of the stats, he's just been on another level physically and motor wise. That's super encouraging to see. I doubted whether we'd ever get to this point in his health for him to be able to frenetically and frantically move all around the court. But we're back to seeing like the Nightcrawler teleporting all over the place, Vando. And while I do think he still has this weird running gait, I don't know if you've seen him run up and down the court, but I'm kind of like, why does he look super flat footed? I just kind of put that in the back of my mind, because whenever I see him jump and dive for the ball, he looks perfectly fine. So, weird, awkward running gait aside, Jared Vanderbilt's second and third jumps have returned. His hands are swiping everywhere, and he's just been scrappy and nippy as hell. And even from like an offensive standpoint, believe it or not, Jared Vanderbilt over the last 8 games or so, it's 6 of 13 from three. He is
Yeah.
really nailing down that baseline 3-point shot. And I feel like 4 of those 6 threes have come off of Luka Doncic drives, And he's super wide open, dude.
Yeah.
And Jared Vanderbilt actually has a pretty nice arc on his shot. So I'm pretty confident that if they keep leaving him that wide open, and he actually doesn't even need to be that wide open, because Luka Doncic will find a way to make his teammates open. If he can just keep focusing on that shot and hitting one every game or two or so, I mean, that's found money for the Lakers. And because he's been such a spark off the bench in terms of energy and activity, Yeah, he's kind of just like the glue forward that sort of knits everything together, knits DFS, Rui, LeBron, and Luka, and even Jaxson Hayes together. Because sometimes we'll just go full small ball, and we're perfectly fine with Vando, Rui, and DFS. But your thoughts on Vando sort of rounding into form health wise, and then he's just playing with a mental edge that we haven't seen before. I don't know what happened the last couple of games, but it seems like he's getting into fights with people every single time down. I don't know if it's because that TBS, the TNT thing aired where Anthony Davis punked him with a goat, but ever since that aired, Vando has been a different player both on and off the court.
It's like Trey Jemison is like rubbing off on everybody. It's
Yeah.
so I think the one thing, and I forgot, I mean, I'll have to go back and actually watch the highlights from our Western Conference Finals run a few years ago, but um you kind of forget like how physical Vanderbilt plays. I think that's the crazy thing, right? Is like there are a lot of these like 6'8", 6'9" wings nowadays with length who are kind of known for being defensive guys. I'm thinking of like your Jaden McDaniels archetype. Of course, he's like in the elite category of this archetype, but like that sort of archetype where it's like they can guard on the perimeter and they have really elite length. So even if a quick guy gets by them, they can still contest. They can switch on to fours, but they're lean guys, right? And Vanderbilt kind of looks like that build, but he like bodies people. And he's not afraid to muck it up. And I think like the fact that he gets so many rebounds and limited minutes is further evidence of that. So yeah, I think like watching him sort of round into form has been great. I actually meant to text you after the game, like one of the side benefits of like just manhandling these teams the way that we have been able to is we're not winning these a lot of these. I mean, some of these games are going down to the wire, but in many of these games, we're building like 15, 20 point leads. And, it kind of takes the pressure off of everyone to be perfect on every single possession. And the benefit
Mhm.
of that is you get these possessions where it's like, Vando's not pressing on his corner 3-point attempts because we're up 20. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like we're in these like situations we've been in, certainly the past 2 years, where we dug ourselves such a deep hole that we left ourselves no margin for error by the time the last 25 games of the season or or so
Mhm.
came along, and we were like, okay, we have to win like 20 out of 25 to have a chance. It's like we're not at that point right now, and so
There's also not pressure to perform perfectly defensively, if that makes any sense. Because I feel like when the role players like DFS, Vando, and even Jaxson Hayes go out there, they can kind of just leave it all out on the floor and sell out
yeah.
because even if they get in foul trouble, like kind of last night with Jaxson Hayes, and I think 2 nights ago, like Vando was in foul trouble against the Denver Nuggets, right? Because they know DFS and like Rui are behind them, and because JJ knows that, and now that we have like Jordan Goodwin and Trey Jameson too, it's like, dude, even if you only play 7 minutes in the first half because you're in foul trouble, who cares? That was a foul well spent because it kind of just keeps up that sort of gritty mentality that we've been sort of culling up.
Yeah, and again, props to JJ and the coaching staff with the way they're using this guy because you know, I I think Billy Mack or somebody made this comment on the during the game yesterday where it's like you're in the fourth quarter, you're heading towards the end of the game, and Vanderbilt has played like 15 minutes. And he said something like, yeah, it seems like he's played a lot more than 15 minutes. And part of that is his impact, but part of that is JJ is deploying him in these like 3-minute shifts where he like goes out and just goes all out and leaves everything on the floor for those 3 minutes. He subs out for 5 minutes, and the next time we need a forward sub, he subs back in, and same thing. I'll have like a 3-4 minute stretch where he just goes all out. And again, major props for figuring out ways to like utilize Vando to like his maximum effectiveness. It's not the case that like somebody is performing well in one category, so that means we now have to play this guy 35 minutes a game, which was unfortunately something we had to suffer through a lot the last couple of years. Having an understanding of your roster and having an understanding of all of your players strengths and weaknesses is really important. And
Hmm.
I think that, it's a perfect situation for Vando with this coaching staff because he can focus on the things that he is good at. He can get confidence those ways. And then when the opportunities arise to, take the open corner three or, attack off the dribble, he can do that and not feel like he's going to get yanked in 2 seconds because, that wasn't within exactly in his role. So,
Yeah.
I'm super, super impressed with Vando. I agree. There was like this short period where it was like, oh God, is he getting hurt again? Or, something felt a little off, but it seems like he's sort of found his footing. And yeah, I praying for no more injuries because this is the player that we thought we signed to that extension.
Yes.
Um, and we're paying him 12 million next year. That's going to be like below the MLE already. And obviously, as the cap goes up, it's going to be even like lower and lower. He's going to be a below league average salary player in a couple of years, if not next year. So, you know, that's you play that guy 16, 18 minutes a game. That's extremely for the kind of energy and effort output you get during that stretch. Very, very worthwhile investment.
Yeah, for sure. And that type of energy and activity defensively that he brings sort of compounds upon one another when you take into account DFS, Jordan Goodwin, Trey Jameson, Rui Hachimura, Jaxson Hayes. And yeah, this is kind of what you're seeing, the number one defense in the NBA. All right, lastly, on the topic of good coaching and being able to communicate and level with your players well, let's talk about the work JJ Redick has done with rookie Dalton Knecht because you want to talk about resiliency. Dalton has had a very weird season, and I've had a very weird sort of journey in my evaluation of him. Like when we first drafted him, I was like, yeah, he's a good shooter. Yeah, he's athletic. He's cool. But maybe we can trade him for like Corey Kispert. Or at the beginning of the season, I was like, let's trade him for Walker Kessler before that was an actual popular thing to say because everybody was super high on him. And then the moment I started watching him play, he dropped like 36 points in the preseason, and then he had that 37-point game with 9 threes against Utah. I was like, oh shit, okay, I understand why people are high on this dude. His ceiling is insane. And the way that he can get buckets in such a short period of time and how easily he can get these buckets. Like I started to see the vision so much so that I went the other way and I was like, yo, if forced to pick, I would trade this. I would trade Austin Reeves over this dude right now. Now, obviously, that is a very insane thing to say these days, especially now with Luka Doncic on the team and the Lakers wanting to, still go for it and still win now in the next few years. And but putting all that to the side and having a more grounded, realistic, you know, viewpoint of Dalton Knecht, I feel like a lot of fans have now veered the exact opposite way and kind of taken him for granted. And in the mix of the Mark Williams trade and everything, he's kind of just got like literally and figuratively like lost in the muck of everything and lost in. I mean, this must be such a hard thing to, have been in a trade, have flown out to Charlotte, met your new teammates, and then had to fly back and sort of you want to talk about cognitive dissonance for him to have to rewire his brain to be like, oh, okay, I should be excited about these guys that I've been playing with. This new Luka Doncic guy is here. Okay, let me try and get in the moment. And so it's taken a little bit of time for Dalton to get here, which is understandable. He's a rookie and he just underwent such a strange period in his life. And I know he still has a lot to work on defensively. He can still be a mess. But as we're seeing in certain games, if you can plug Dalton into a very like reinforced game plan and scheme, you can really leverage his athleticism and his sturdy body. You just can't put him out on an island to have to use his lateral quickness against a quick ball handler. But if you're playing zone or if Dalton Knecht is swiping in or digging in as the help man, that's when you can really use his like shot blocking ability, his ability to sky for rebounds. I think people are underappreciating that like rebounding is a part of defense and that's what Dalton Knecht does well. But outside of that, like he has really turned it around offensively these last few games. I think he's like 9 of 17 from 3 the last 3 games. And we're starting to see his chemistry with Luka Doncic gel. And I've been waiting to see Luka Doncic pitch it out to Dalton Knecht and for him to just fire up that 3 ball flawlessly and freely and it's been going down the last couple of games. He had like 5 threes along with Luka Doncic the last game. I think he had another 2 threes yesterday, but we're starting to see Dalton regain his confidence, and like he's still hammering the ball down in transition. He's starting to show off his playmaking skills. It's unfortunate for a player like Dalton that his ceiling, you only get to see his ceiling when he actually gets reps, usage, and the ball in his hands, because that's when you're like, oh, so this dude can just pull up on a dime anywhere on the court and drain this mid-range jump shot. Why don't we do that more? Well, we don't do that more because we have Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, and LeBron James on this team, and Dalton is asked to space the floor. But even in that limited role, even in that assignment to space the floor, you can already see how this can work out with Luka Doncic and LeBron James, and how Dalton is sort of like a breath of fresh air offensively, especially when you've had to roll out lineups with like Trey Jameson, Jordan Goodwin, Jared Vanderbilt on the floor, and the floor is a little bit more condensed. And you see Luka Doncic, in his passing mode, drive into the lane and then pitch it out to, Jared Vanderbilt, who's been hitting his baseline three, but that's less than ideal. So when you have a more natural spacer on the floor like Dalton Knecht, who can also take you off the dribble and pull up on a dime in the mid range, or go straight to the rim and hammer down a tomahawk jam, that's when you can kind of see like, oh, this Lakers team can really be lethal because it's more balanced than, we envisioned. So your thoughts on Dalton Knecht's sort of turnaround here recently?
Yeah, it has been nice to watch. I mean, with these rookies, especially rookies who, I don't want to say one dimensional, but like certainly perimeter shooting focused rookies, I feel like those guys, it's always tough. Rookie seasons are often filled with many ups and downs. I For some whatever reason, I think maybe it's the speed of the game, and them getting, they're so dependent on like their specific timing, and they're getting the right reps, right? It always feels like the shooting is can be hit or miss. I think the interesting thing about Dalton is like, notwithstanding everything I just said, he's still shooting like, if I'm not mistaken, mid to high 30s from three as a rookie.
Yeah, he's like 37%. He's like second in his rookie class in 3 pointers made, just behind Jalen Wells. And he's tied with Jalen Wells for the most games this season amongst rookies of hitting 5+ threes. He has six games of such. And so does Jalen Wells. So, I mean, those are like,
Yeah, and so like when
historic
you're
numbers.
projecting that kind of stuff out, I mean, that kind of guys who have those kinds of starts as rookies as perimeter shooters, those end up being like, career 40% plus 3-point shooters who can like really get on heaters. I mean, Dalton is going to have a game in his career where he hits 9+ threes. There's like no question about that. Um, and so, you wonder where does the other, or can he get there on the other stuff? And he's a big guard, and maybe you think of him as a wing even. He doesn't need to be Gabe Vincent as a point of attack defender. He needs to just focus on the things that he can control. I think the rebounding is a big one that you pointed out. I've noticed that his rebounding has been a lot better in the last few games. He uses his athleticism and jumping ability to go up there and grab the balls. I think like if he can continue to focus on that kind of stuff, he'll continue to get time, and he'll continue to get reps, and it's just going to continue to push his development along. He went from a guy where I was like at first, when the Williams trade was announced, I was like, yeah, it's tough because he's very clearly going to have a nice career, but it might be a one-dimensional career, and maybe Charlotte, and it's a tanking team situation where he is going to get tons of on-ball usage to like really develop his individual game. Maybe that's like a better fit for him. Went from that quickly to like, okay, we need to really think about what we're going to do with this guy moving forward, because you can't. I think some of the worst trades in NBA history happened because people were chasing a position of need over just the better talent.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and so that's the fear with Dalton that I have now is like, it if you're looking at the 1 through 9, 1 through 10 even rotation for the Lakers for next season, and keep in mind like all of our current core rotation is under contract for next season, like Dalton doesn't have an obvious spot there necessarily. especially with Luka and Austin both in the backcourt and the need for like maybe more defense in the backcourt. But that said, like you almost like hope that the Williams trade, like people getting rescinded, like people now view it as like, okay, we've sort of given ourselves a second chance. And depending on how strongly Dalton, I kind of hope, I'm rooting for him to close really, really strongly to make them really second guess what they want to do about this guy. Because, yeah, I texted you before the second Clippers game and I said, this would be a really good night for Dalton to get 20. And I think he scored 19 in that game or something, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like, you know, I was not expecting that because his confidence has been like all over the map. And then like he followed that up with another solid game. He may have had some, not just the perimeter shooting, but had some nice passes in the Pelicans game and,
Hmm.
plays generally on both ends. And so, yeah, if he can continue to string these types of games together, he will undoubtedly have his moment. Maybe it's a 5-minute stretch in the playoffs, but if he comes in a stretch and hits some threes, it could turn a game. And so, it's
Yeah.
going to be interesting to see what we do long term. But I think the point of all of this is I went very quickly from like, oh yeah, he's obviously the best combination of A, out of the rotation, and B, talented enough to actually have some value to get you something back. That makes him the ideal candidate to trade. And now I'm just like, these are the types of pieces you just kind of maybe you need to hang on to and figure out how to make them work in your system because maybe you don't need to chase a position of need if it means dropping your overall talent level back. And that's the fear I have with Dalton because he's clearly very,
Yeah.
very talented.
Yeah. And now you see why JJ Redick has kind of push and pull to keep Dalton in the rotation, even when he was struggling, right? Because there's going to come a time when, whether it's due to foul trouble or injuries, where we're going to need like a 5-minute stretch of someone to go out there and hit a shot, you know? So I wouldn't rule out the Lonnie Walker game for Dalton Knecht in the playoffs, you know? Definitely not rule that out. And I have to correct you, Tommy, but Dalton Knecht has already had a game where he's hit
There
9
you go.
threes.
I
That's what he
forgot
did
about that.
against
Yeah.
Utah. So there you go.
10
Excuse
plus
me.
threes.
All right, 10 plus these. He's definitely going to do it. And yeah, you can naturally see where Dalton fits next to Luka Doncic. Like Luka Doncic literally played next to Klay Thompson in
Yeah.
Dallas, you know? You just hope for more defensive potential rounding into form for Dalton as he continues to grow and progress. But remember, this dude is just a rookie. People are going to say he's an old rookie. He's 23 years old. Yeah, but he progressed in basketball late. It's almost like a different version of Rui Hachimura, you know? He was JUCO for much of his life, I believe, until he finally became Division 1 last season,
Yeah.
right? Like that's like he had to grow so much and develop so much in that period of time. And so like his age is not commensurate to, oh yeah, typical growth pattern for any
Yeah.
NBA player, you know?
I
So
mean, if
um
you're not familiar with the history, right? For anyone listening, it's like he started his college career in JUCO. He went to a D3 school after that, and then he went to Tennessee. And in 1 year at Tennessee, took them further in the tournament than like they'd been in decades,
yeah,
right? So it's like, and he like became so impactful in his 1 year playing D1 college basketball that like teams were scheming their entire game plan to stop this guy. So
exactly. So why are we evaluating him after just even 1 year having seen his flaws and deficiencies? Like it's all about like we just have to continue to contextualize as much as possible. And this kind of like applies to everybody we've talked about, the role players that we've talked about throughout the years and throughout this, even just this episode. Like Jaxson Hayes, like it always tends to happen with the players who don't get consistent time, who don't get consistent reps, who are the quote unquote role players, who aren't the superstars like LeBron James and Luka Doncic. It's like we this is why JJ Redick is JJ Redick, and he has to sort of juggle all of these personalities and skill sets and all that stuff, make sure that they're still engaged so that when the time is right and their number is called upon, they are ready. And so far, more often than not, like even look at a guy like Shake Milton, right? He's been out of the rotation, like a two-way player has taken his spot, and he comes in and he's like 12 points and had like the second best plus minus of the night yesterday. You know that this is the type of team you want, Tommy, where from the first player right on down to like the 15th player, like whenever they're called upon, they know who they are, they know their role within this team and the system, and they will execute and perform, you know? um all right, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you guys for listening or watching. Follow us on Twitter or X at Lakers Legacy Pod. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Lakers Legacy Pod. And hit us up with a 5-star rating and review on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify. And we will catch you guys next time. I think this is like the second podcast episode in a row, Tommy, where like we haven't talked about a loss because there hasn't been a loss. We're just like on a win streak for the ages. But yeah, with that said, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.